Namaste,
Namaste.
and welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. The first part of this will be discussion on virus. Good.
We started last time on the theme of viruses and bacteria. And of course, we dwelt much more on bacteria. We changed our understanding of what bacteria represent. First of all, what modern medicine has taught us that bacteria are something to be feared is an error. Because 90% of the bacteria, according to science, are actually good for us. Second, we discover that our body is actually full of bacteria, made up of bacteria even, and the body needs the bacteria in the gut, on the skin, and many other places. They serve an important role. We saw last time that there are more bacteria than cells even in the body. And we recognize that rather than trying to kill bacteria, which only makes them grow back, and generally the more vicious ones which grow faster, the more healthy way of nature is to fill space with good bacteria so that the bad bacteria don't have a chance to come in or grow. And this was the approach in the past, generally for hygiene in houses, even in the food we ate, and so on. But all of this brought us to the recognition, the insight that the mother gives, that the bacteria themselves are a physical material form of the clashing energies of the tiny vital beings of ill will as they clash and break each other down until they lose their separate individuality and become energies of ill will, which are as if in a cluster, which get a material form and become the bad bacteria. But equally, there are forces of good, little beings of the lower vital, which are energies of good, and there are much more of that, which also, in their lowest gradation where they break down, are the good bacteria. And so, we recognize that bacteria are at their source or at their origin a bundle of energy with a physical coating or a physical base of a degree of materialization. And with this picture now, we will review the whole scope and the role of bacteria in us. And again, I'll draw upon modern scientific research, which comes up with some fascinating insights, some of which I mentioned last time, that in your gut, the balance of bacteria actually change the working of your brain. They change the working of your thoughts. So if you're depressed, there's a particular pattern of gut bacteria. If you change the gut bacteria balance, your depression goes away. You have schizophrenic tendencies, change of gut bacteria will correct the schizophrenic tendencies. You're bipolar, change of bacteria in the gut will change the symptoms of bipolarity or remove it completely. And even other serious illnesses such as Alzheimer's have been linked to gut bacteria. And all this is to show extreme diseases, but even more subtle psychological states change. So change of gut bacteria, for example, can change your mood. If you're primarily pessimistic, changing your gut bacteria can make you primarily optimistic. So science is just discovering this, and this is research going back only last few years. And they don't understand why. They still think there's some chemical secretion which is going into bloodstream, which is changing chemical secretion in the brain, but that's not how it works. And so I'm going to give a couple of examples before we will describe how it actually works. So there's a particular parasite which lives in mice, but it cannot survive in mice. It breeds in the cat. So what does it do? When it infects the mouse, the parasite infected in the mouse, well, they say secretes chemicals, hormones, we don't know what, that's the assumption at least. It does something to the mouse behavior that suddenly the mouse loses its natural fear of cats. And now this infected mouse is actually fascinated by the cat and is attracted to the cat. So the mouse goes and gives itself practically to the cat eats it up, and the parasite gets inside the cat where it can breed and multiply and come out of the cat's body in its droppings which is then picked up by the mouse and goes back into the mouse body and comes back to the cat and goes back to mouse body and pulls the mouse to cat to survive. Now here you get an extraordinary insight. A parasite sitting in your gut can change your entire personality, make you suddenly daring where you had fear of cat. Now you have daring or even attraction, which is almost like a vital attraction. And it's not by physical process, it's by vital energy. In that parasite, or the nature of the parasite, the life force in the parasite is attracting to the cat. That life force inside your life force is overriding your life force impulses and imprinting its will into your body and making you behave differently. Now, does this correspond to something which we know in human experience? We will call it possession, right? Mm-hmm. Some force got into you and made you behave in ways that were contrary to your nature. Isn't that what we call possession? That's what parasites actually represent. And I'm going to push this a little bit, and if someone from the conventional science hears it, they will say, oh, this guy is cuckoo and he's a bit unstable. But push it logically. Even in the human being, the existence of a parasite in the body represents an independent energy that lives inside you, which has its own individuality. Effectively a possession. It compels changes in your life force, changes in your behavior. It pushes, pulls, modifies. And depending on the sophistication and force of that energy bundle and the complexity of it, it can even change your personality.
I would like to ask you then, in the world of plants, when we have a parasitic plant, it lives and feeds on another plant.
Yes.
How does this work?
All the same concept here. The plant you have to see now purely as a form of vital energy, meeting another form of vital energy. Depending on the relationship of these two energies, they can even be symbiotic. They could nourish each other and help each other. Or one of them might be harmful and may suck the juice out of the other one and kill it. So there are trees which die because a particular vine grows around it and sucks out its juice. Or there are vines which actually give to the tree some content of energy, even as they take from the tree some nourishment, and the two help each other. It all depends on the relationship of their energies. So there could be parasites which are good for you. Now let's go back to our earlier example of the bacteria. If you see the bacteria as a bundle of good energy, of goodness, the good bacteria in your gut, which are actually giving you nourishment, represent the good energy. You could still call them parasite, but they're no more parasite. They are now in a symbiosis. They can't live without you, you can't live without them. And so they're giving you nutrition. But when you have a parasite which is taking from you and not giving you goodness but illness, then you have a problem. And often various kinds of parasites exist who are doing that. So the physical parasite effectively represents an energy bundle which has infected you or possessed you, however partially. Now this is a serious statement. Equally, I will say, if there is a possession of some energy from outside, it will very quickly develop a physical form or representation of its hold or hook inside you, which may take a form of a parasitical worm or some other creature, or bacteria. Bacteria being the most pliable, the most expressive, and the most directly expressive of changes of energy patterns of prana. So when an external energy hooks into you, in the gut, bacteria is the first space, because subconscious, that it can hook and form its own instruments. And therefore, gut bacteria is seen to influence your state of mind or state of emotions. Now this gets into a domain which is far more occult than physical biological medicine. And you can see how an occult intervention to remove the possession would have its resulting effects of change inside your body, but also a change in the biological basis may weaken the link of that energy to hook into you and even allow it to be expelled. And so it's a two-way connection. Now we come to we understand why the gut biome can change so much our psychology. A change in gut biome can turn you from a meek person to a, as if courageous, vitally assertive, even coarsely assertive, or from a vitally assertive to a meek person just by that change. So there's a whole domain now of medical intervention called fecal transplant, where you find a person who has all the healthy characteristics that you want, take a little bit of the feces from within their gut, take it through a kind of a filtration to remove anything which is negative, and then insert the feces inside your big intestine, and from there it spreads and your illness goes away. Whether it is a psychological illness or a biological physical illness, it just goes away.
How severe? Like cancer also?
Severe, with cancer we don't know. So far, at least I'm not aware of it. But the research papers I've seen, they cover psychosomatic diseases, psychological diseases, including, as I said, even pretty extreme mental bipolarity or depression, and equally irritable bowel syndrome and other things which have to do with the digestive process. And often where you have a major imbalance of nutrition, that also gets corrected, because now the good bacteria are growing inside you, creating for you the nutrition, something which we discussed in our previous session, that the bacteria inside you are actually converting food into nutritional content which the food didn't have, including vitamins they manufacture, which your body then absorbs. So the good bacteria coming in can change entirely your whole well-being.
But this is taken from another person.
It's taken from another person. Now if you think about what it means, there's actually a transplant of a certain quality of energy,
Yes.
but at a physical level, and which then pushes back from a physical level and helps to change the balance. So the same thing would happen with your skin. In fact, does happen with your skin. There's something very interesting which is again part of the research. They have no explanation for it. They discover that in a baby, newborn baby, inside the gut, there are bacteria which correspond to its parent's gut bacteria. How does that happen? There's actually no transference from gut to gut, right? The placental wall is supposed to filter out all bacteria. So a newborn baby, it's got out of the body, and inside the gut it develops the same bacteria as the mother's gut. In fact, they found it corresponds very closely to the bacteria in the mouth of the mother. So perhaps it is through the act of holding, cuddling, or kissing the child that the bacteria gets transferred. But if that does not happen, the child does not have good immunity. Interesting. So nature has as if designed a whole mechanism of biopsychological behavior which would allow the transfer of bacteria. But also the suggestion implied is, if a lot of your energy pours into another, something of the bacteria pattern within you may tend to replicate in the other, because it's the energy which is causing the formation of the bacteria, right? And especially in the gut, because that's the part which is subconscious. And so it is often found that people who are married couple who are very close energetically tend to have similar gut bacteria patterns or similar problems emerging from imbalance of gut bacteria patterns. All this, of course, is in a healthy state. Now you take antibiotics, you break that pattern, and the child may have irritable bowel syndrome for the rest of his life because that initial transmission has been now unbalanced, or other illnesses which can follow.
So you say this is taken from another person, and you mentioned it being an occult phenomena also.
At the same time, there's a physical content, there's a psychological, energetic content, because we are now looking at bacteria not merely as physical entities, but life energy bundles with a physical coating. So that's also being transferred.
So great healers who are mystics or saints, could you speak a little about that? How they cure?
But that's a very different level of cure. That is happening at the level either of life force, which is more free, or of a spiritual force, but of a different level of vibration. Here we are speaking of a grade of vibration which is near the physical, lower vital and physical. That's why I said couples who are very close, intimate, they would tend to have similar things. Recently, there was one paper I saw where they said that a child who was, what's that, excessive introversion? Autistic. The child who is autistic was cured by fecal transplant, correction of gut bacteria. So, what we find is an amazing spread of problems, including psychological problems, which seem to be otherwise incurable, are corrected by the change of gut bacteria balance. And it shows you we are intervening at a level which is physical and lower vital in that band. Where current medicine was largely focused on the gross physical, through the gut bacteria interventions, it's entering into a domain which is slightly higher, closer to the vital physical or physical vital link. One more interesting research, which will further explain this whole thing. They discover that, well, we have a unique bacteria pattern which are in our lungs, right? And we are breathing out. It's there in our breath, distinct and unique. But something more interesting, we seem to have a unique bacteria pattern in the air surrounding our physical body. And to which the scientists, of course, don't know how to explain this. They say, well, maybe from the skin and from your breath, you are putting out your own distinctive bacteria pattern, which forms like and here's the interesting word, aura. A physical aura of a distinctive bacteria pattern as distinctive as your genetic type and psychological type. Now the implication of this is even more dramatic once we look at it from the yoga perspective. Let's say two people are living next to each other closely, sharing the same room. What happens? Your bacteria air aura, her bacteria aura will overlap, will exchange. In physical terms, you're transferring what would happen on a vital energetic level of exchange, which would be there naturally, the fact that you're close all the time. And you would tend to acquire their characteristics as they would acquire your characteristics. But here you have a biological description of this transference. Of course, we don't explain how it happens. They don't even explain how it is that we sustain this aura around us, because we're moving all the time, the air is flowing all the time, and yet, if you come close enough, the bacteria pattern around your body is distinctly typical of you and measurably distinct. And the only explanation you have, and I'm going to put it in again in a terms which can label me if someone wants to, the life energy, your subtle physical extension around the body, a vital physical bridge in between, is what you're measuring when you're trying to measure the bacteria in the air around you. That part densifying into physical terms is what you're catching when you take the air here and recognize the bacteria there.
Is it similar to the subtle envelope?
Yes, it's of that grade of density of the nervous envelope, subtle physical, bordering the vital. And so, again, implications of this is we exchange energy, we exchange bacteria, but even if we don't exchange bacteria, there will be a formation of bacteria which will be similar. And we come back to that extraordinary statement which I read out from the mother last time, where she says there are far more bacteria than people know, than we know today. In fact, for every distinct quality of consciousness or energy, there will be a corresponding bacterial form. Isn't it? So, goodness in your consciousness will lead to good bacteria formations. Ill will, hatred, conflict in your consciousness will tend to produce bad bacteria or bacteria of illness, of conflict, of degeneration, sickness, in other words. So now you see the correspondence clearly. Your psychological state will produce or will represent in the bacteria in your aura, eventually in your microbiome, of course in the skin, of course, and in your microbiome. So here we have a direct link from psychological state to biological process. In the microbiome, it will get fixed in a certain pattern because now it has a material character and will lead to other chain of sequences of illnesses or other problems. So let's say energetically, in your psychology, if there is hatred towards something, it's like a sharp edge poking, or energy thrown out in hatred, eventually it will take the form in your skin or microbiome in the gut, where it will take on a bacteria which has quality of energy of poking, pushing, nudging, breaking, disrupting, and illnesses which correspond to that kind of behavior of the bacteria. Or if within your psychology there is an inertia, passivity, dullness, sadness, depression, it will create bacteria which bring that kind of characteristic in behavior and dull down and reduce the absorption of nutrition in your gut, make less effective the good bacteria which are in your gut, and so on. Tamas or inertia or dullness. And you will have depletion in your blood of various nutritional content.
Can we therefore invite bacteria?
Yes, potentially. But I would say we invite the energy, invoke the energy, and the good bacteria will grow around it.
Yes.
You know, Mother was very sensitive to smells, not just physical smells, but the occult smells of people's aura. So someone comes with ill will, she would immediately sneeze. Someone came with complaints and there's anger or some disruption, they would open the room and enter and she would sneeze. And everyone knew what that meant.
Yes.
So what you're seeing here is the aura you bring, which is on a purely energetic level much larger, has its densest gradation, which is close to the physical body, where it acquires the character of the bacteria and therefore also of illnesses corresponding to that. Equally now this can transmit. So you can catch infections, or you can be full of good bacteria which protect you and prevent bad bacteria entering. So you will see in a hospital, the doctors often don't fall sick, although they're meeting the sick people all the time. And the very doctors who don't fall sick are the ones who have a strong vitality, full of optimism, positivity. They have to keep going and telling the patient, you'll get well, you'll be fine, don't worry. The pattern of the doctors is very interesting. And if you ever go to a doctor in a in surgery or in a big hospital, you'll find them full of this very hard, dense material vitality, dominating, pushing. You meet them in their house, and I've had this experience many times. You meet them in their house, they're gentle, nice, and the same hardness of vitality is gone. It's almost as if they trained themselves to harden this sheath of vitality while they're in that space of exposure, and then they come back and they're a completely different person. And if you met them there, the person says, oh, I'm a doctor or I'm a surgeon. You don't see the hardness. They put on the surgeon's clothes, enter the surgery room, and you find this edge, hard, focus, rigidity in the vital physical band particularly. And that's their protection. So it's happened over time. They've learned or whatever it is. Or they hide it capacity, and so that's how they're immune. Others tend to drop out. They don't last too long in the business. So we've seen now bacteria not only in the gut, not only on the skin, but in your aura, representing your psychological state. Now we take this a step further. Mother has this statement which again will be shocking to many. And again I will say, do not stop taking your medicines, but understand the point. So she's speaking first of vaccination and all that, and then she says, one thing that is now beginning to be recognized by everyone, even by medical corps, is that hygienic measures, for example, are effective only to the extent that one has confidence in them. Okay, now think about it. You go to a hospital, oh yeah, this is a sterile place, nothing can happen to me. That's your confidence. Take the case of an epidemic. Many years ago, we had a cholera epidemic here. It was bad. But the chief medical officer of the hospital was an energetic man. Now we understand. He decided to vaccinate everybody. When he discharged the vaccinated men, he would tell them, now you are vaccinated and nothing will happen to you. But if you were not vaccinated, you would be sure to die. You see the programming which is put with the vaccination program. He told them this with great authority. And remember, with a strong vitality, you punch it into them. It becomes a part of their belief energy. Generally, such an epidemic lasts a long time and it is difficult to arrest it. But in some 15 days, I think, this doctor succeeded in checking it. In any case, it was done miraculously fast. But he knew very well that the best effect of his vaccination was the confidence it gave to people. And then now she comes to this. The statement will go against the current medical understanding, but I'm sure those who read this 10 years from now might end up saying, oh yeah, she knew then what science has just discovered. And if any of you are researchers in medicine, well, look for this and you will find you'll be the first to discover and validate it. So Mother says, now quite recently, they have found something else and I consider it wonderful. They have discovered that for every disease, there is a microbe that cures it. Call it a microbe if you like. Anyway, some sort of germ. So don't stick to the scientific vocabulary, whether it's microbe, germ, whatever you say, but something. But what is so extraordinary is that this microbe is extremely contagious. Even more contagious than the microbe of the disease. And it generally develops under two conditions. In those who have a sort of natural good humor and energy, and in those who have a strong will to get well. Now, if you just think about this statement from what we discussed earlier, it's so obvious. The moment you have this good humor, positivity, and then a strong will, well, that is creating your positive microbes for what? Precisely neutralizing the thing which is your illness. Right? So it's a contrary vibration to the microbe which had the illness, and it pushes against that, replaces the bad microbe with the good will, good energy, good sense of health. And if it can grow within you, of course, as a microbe, you can transmit it to others. If the bad microbe could also spread, the good one can also. So she says, suddenly they catch the microbe and are cured. And what is wonderful is that if there is one who is cured in an epidemic, 3 more recover immediately. And this microbe is found in all who are cured. Now, in editing it, Mother has put quote marks around the word microbe, but I'm going to tell you something. What people take to be microbe is simply the materialization of a vibration or a will from another world. We're coming back to this idea. Materialization of a vibration or will from another world. When I learned of these medical discoveries, I said to myself, truly, science is making progress. She's looking at it as an occultist, where she has mastery of all these experiences. And she says, science is now catching up. Good thing. Science is making progress. One might almost say with greater reason, matter is progressing. It is becoming more and more receptive to a higher will. And what is translated in their science as microbes will be perceived, if one goes to the root of things, as simply a vibratory mode. And this vibratory mode is the material translation of a higher will. So you have to think about it in this way. There's a will in your mind, in your life force, a pattern of energy in the vital energy. And we can describe it as a vibration, as if of a quality of consciousness, of energy. And that begins to be more and more materialized. And this vibratory mode is the material translation of a higher will. And that takes the form of the microbe in a material encasement. So she says, if you can bring this force or this will, this power, this vibration, call it what you will, into certain given circumstances, not only will it act in you, but also through contagion around you. So the point she made, one person gets well and suddenly 3 more get well. You see, when an epidemic spreads, one person gets ill and then 3 more get ill. It spreads by multiplication rapidly. The current coronavirus in China is doubling every 5 days. That's the official rate at least. But that's the pace of multiplication. But equally, when suddenly you have the end of the epidemic, it doesn't taper off gradually. It collapses suddenly. So someone gets well, and suddenly you have a chain reaction of people getting well. And that's what she's describing here. So it's by contagion it spreads. And then there's the question someone asked, why is it that we drink filtered water? So she mentioned, why during the talk in 1929, a disciple asked why we drank filtered water since we did not believe in microbes here. Mother answered, is any of you pure and strong enough not to be affected by suggestions? If you drink unfiltered water and think, now I'm drinking impure water, you have every chance of falling sick. And even though such suggestions may not enter through the conscious mind, the whole of your subconscious is there, almost helplessly open to any kind of suggestion. The normal human condition is a state filled with apprehension and fears. If you observe your mind deeply for 10 minutes, you will find that for 9 out of 10, it is full of fears. And even if by discipline and effort you have liberated your mind and your vital of apprehension and fear, it is more difficult to convince the body. And someone asks, why is it difficult to convince the body and so on? Those who are interested can continue to read this. But the point here is, the person who is installing the water filter in your house is convinced that if you don't clean it after 1 or 2 years, you're going to fall sick. So he tells you every 2 years you have to replace your filter. And that fear is sitting in your mind. And then they call you after 2 years, replace your filter, otherwise you might get sick. Right? If you didn't know that, I know people who have never replaced their filter for 10, 20 years. Fine, we have filtered water anyway, it's good. But the problem is the suggestion. And in the subconscious, in the collective, there's this whole machinery. Remember Sri Aurobindo using capital letters for modern science. It's this being, this gigantic being that says, if you don't do this, you will surely die. But if you do this, you will be protected. Almost like I will protect you. Science is protecting me, you see. Having understood this, with the concept which she has introduced here, which is so important, so radical, the good bacteria. That to get cured for any illness, there is a good bacteria which will cure that illness, which is more contagious than the bad bacteria. And so we come back to that thing we started with last time. 90% of all bacteria are good bacteria. Only 10% are so-called bad. And so in our own environment, if we fill ourselves with goodwill, good, positive, optimistic energy, we are generating good bacteria or repelling bad bacteria, and you will find you are automatically immune. But this must seep in all the way to your most physical part. It's not enough that in my mind I think, oh, all positive, all good, but my body says, yes, but this is not nice, that fellow is not good, it doesn't feel nice here. That's a very different vibration. That's where the illnesses come really. You must seep it into the physical consciousness. So with this background, where we have primarily focused on bacteria, I have so far not spoken of viruses. And there's a very big difference we must understand between viruses and bacteria. You see, again, in the common description, we almost use these words interchangeably. I have a viral infection, I have a bacterial infection. What's the difference? Oh, it's just we use different medicines. That's all we know, right? We can even say bacterial infection you kill with antibiotic, but viral infection you cannot. Even if you take antibiotic, it will do nothing. You need an antiviral, and that's only given in very rare circumstances, and it doesn't act on all viruses either. And you have a very different story with the virus. So first, let's understand the difference. Bacteria are complete self-contained units that live by themselves. They have a genetic core, and then they have a whole machinery to manufacture, to spread, to grow in the genetic code, and to split, to make two. So they give birth. Bacteria are giving birth all the time. Every 20 minutes, a bacterium will split to form two. So if you have a petri dish with one single bacterium, 20 minutes later you have 2, 20 minutes later you have 4, 20 minutes later you have 8, 16, 32. And if you have 1 million, 20 minutes later you have 2 million, and 20 minutes later you have 4 million. You can see how the scaling up takes place rapidly. And in the body, if it's a bad bacteria that invades, of course, if it's good, you're good. If it's a bad bacteria that invades, at that point, they will infect a part. Let's say your throat, your chest, your stomach, your lower part of the digestive process or upper part. They are very specific targetings. Virus is fundamentally different. Virus does not target a location. It ends up affecting the whole body. But why? Why is it different? First of all, a virus is not self-contained unit. It does not exist by itself or cannot replicate by itself. In fact, the behavior of virus is such, science is not even sure whether to call it living. Bacteria definitely is a living cell. Virus is not living. It's on the borderline between life and death. So virus, when it goes to sleep, becomes a crystal. You will not see in it any sign of life. You can take it through space, put it in the extremes of radiation of certain types, it will not die. And then you bring it back into an environment which is humid and comfortable, and suddenly this crystalline structure unfolds itself and becomes now an active virus. Now you remember what we just read of what the mother says about the will, force, vibrational quality of energy. And in the virus, you see this even more distinctly than in the bacteria. Bacteria at least is formed and is a material, sustainable, growing structure. A virus does not have any of these. So what does it do? This will does not have a body, does not have an organized mechanism to spread. It must infect another body and hijack its mechanism to replicate itself. So the virus enters a bacterium, or a human cell. The virus enters into it, seizes the machinery, hijacks it totally, inserts its DNA and starts replicating its DNA until it grows so much, replicates copies of its little packets of vibratory energy, will, until the cell cannot contain it anymore and it bursts and all the virus are released. Very different process from bacteria's multiplication. Or occasionally it inserts itself inside and does not replicate too fast, but continues to manufacture bit by bit little pieces while it stays as if in what's the word?
Government.
Not latent, but it's still doing its thing. It's hidden as if, and it's. Like when there's a very special word for it, okay. Like when you have a startup which is in secret mode, there's a word for it, they use the stealth mode, that's the word. So it stays in stealth mode, okay. So it's there, it's doing its thing, but it's not obviously revealing itself until it builds up sufficiently, and after a while you find the disruptions beginning. That's one mode. The other mode is it just keeps growing and the cell bursts. And now you have 1 million viruses going out, hijacking other cells. Suddenly, it gets in, the ill will, now let's talk from an occult point of view, the ill will bundle vibration gets in, hijacks goodwill healthy bundle, warps it, twists it, amplifies itself and then bursts out and spreads now with more force and more pieces. And that's how the virus spreads. But the virus has no capacity of its own to replicate or survive. And this tells you something very important. Even in size, the virus is typically almost 200 times smaller than a bacterium. So bacteria you can see in a microscope, virus you cannot see in a normal microscope, optical microscope. You have to see only in an electron microscope. It's so tiny. And at that point in electron microscopes, you cannot see living things. So we cannot see virus in action. But we see its structure when it is semi-dead. It's never truly dead. It's dormant. And what do you see? Interestingly, it has almost geometric shapes. Because it's a crystal at that point. So there are two kinds of viruses. Either they are spiral, helical we'll say, and then cubical. and some variations of the geometric. It's almost like a cube with sharp, flat edges. But it maybe not be a cube perfectly. It can be one of those with 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever number of sides. But they're called cubical viruses, and these are helical, where it forms like a helical and long cylindrical structure. And then there's a virus which is a complex of these two. The two joint, so there's a helical part and then a cubical head, and that's the virus. And then it goes and attaches, inserts, and makes copies of itself. Unlike a bacterium, which is like a fully formed cell, sometimes with a tail with which it propels itself, nice DNA structure, stable life form, ability to replicate by division. The virus may have a single strand of DNA or a double strand of DNA or some portions which then it inserts, and the mechanism of hijack is not understood. How is it this is able to get in? How does it have the knowledge of how to take over the machinery of the bacteria and manufacture itself? There is not enough intelligence content to be able to manage that. And at that point, you see, science fails here. But the occult understanding, we see clearly, it's the ill will which gets in and seizes the will of the cell, hijacks it, possesses it. Again, the same word, possession. We used that last time. We discussed about possession in the context of parasites. Well, something like this. A possession takes place of the will of the cell by this ill will, which now starts replicating and expanding. So the occult perspective explains, obviously, it doesn't need intelligence for that. It's a seizing of seizing energy. Again, without exception, there is no virus which is good. Unlike bacteria, which is 90% good for us, and even the ones which are bad, really, they are nature's cleaners. They scavenge, and that's why they are bad. They are too violent, too excessive, too overdoing in their action. But among viruses, you don't find anything good. And so, Mother's description of how which we read last time, the lower vital forces of ill will clashing against each other and breaking down and acquiring a physical characteristic applies much more directly to viruses than to bacteria. But and that's where you see only ill will, only harm. They seem to serve no purpose at all in evolution other than, well, helping eliminate the weak in a species so that the strong may grow as a negative. In the scheme of things, that's the purpose that the Asuric forces serve. So in the viral structure itself, you see that operation which matches most closely to ill will and Asuric energies or tendencies. Now, having understood this, we look at what human beings are doing with viruses. And then what we see is not so nice, and it's a bit disturbing. There is a lot of attempt to weaponize this knowledge that we have relatively recently got, both of bacteria and of viruses. Since bacteria can be relatively easily killed, it's not so interesting to weaponize. Viruses being much more aggressive, much more destructive, and can be in stealth mode, rapidly grow in a single cell and burst out into 1 million in one go, they are more useful to weaponize. So there has been concerted programs in the militaries of different parts of the world in the guise of studying viruses to find cures for illnesses. They actually develop more and more complex and dangerous variants of the viruses. And right now we are seeing a huge crisis in China and the rest of the world in what is called the novel coronavirus of 2019. Why novel? Because it's new. What is coronavirus? It's the virus of the common cold. There is another variant of it which is called the SARS virus, and there are a few other, Ebola virus and a few others. Each has its own peculiarities. The common feature on all of them is there's no cure. They're just vicious. They get into you, they hook you, they multiply, they cause you harm with the common cold. You can do nothing. You just wait it out. Take rest until that energy is expelled from your system. And you will notice at the time where the illness turns, suddenly within you an optimism surges. And from that point, now it's going to end, and within 2 or 3 days it's gone. In the same way, when it first gets into you, it's like something troubling you, weakening you, sapping your energy. and you're pushing, and at some point you say, I can't push anymore, I let go, and boom, the illness gets in, and you have caught the viral fever. The fever hits you just like that. Suddenly, temperature shoots up. So you realize primarily the battle is at the level of energies, of which the viral and biological interaction is a representation. But what happens in these weaponization labs? You take these viruses and you try to tweak them and make out of them something, observe, you infect animals, see how rapidly they grow, what kind of illnesses they produce, try to target them to match certain genetics. For example, in one of the countries in the Middle East, I don't name them now, one of the countries I'd seen in around 98, there was a news item that said that country was trying to develop a virus which would be genetically targeted to the genotype of the opposite racial who were against them or who they were against. And you can tailor viruses because the viruses have this one ability, which is all their ability is. Whatever their DNA content, they go and insert it into another cell and multiply. What is their DNA content? You don't care. It can be a single strand, it's not enough to sustain life. But a single strand is enough and the virus will do its job. So the first thing they found, the most useful application of this was to use viruses as a delivery mechanism to insert DNA inside good cells. So all your genetic modification of cells, of grain, of any life forms is done through insertion through a virus. So when they say, for example, we have created a genetically modified breed of vegetable or rice or animal, the question you could ask is, how did they snip out that particular gene and insert it into a healthy cell? Or how did they remove from the healthy cell a piece of gene? Well, the mechanism was the virus. A virus is your delivery tool. So in the process, the virus has inserted your genetic content, but also its own genetic content. And that's the reason why the genetically modified food is sensed by your body to be something weird, something sick, and the body creates a reaction to it. So all those who have, for example, reactions to peanut allergy and various other allergies, which are all new. Now even wheat allergy is a big deal. And it all started in the US. You never heard of peanut allergy before the US. And now it started in India. Because the same breed of peanut is being grown in India. And those breeds were genetically modified with insertion of virus gene and other gene. When it gets into your body, the body is picking up the energetic content of the virus gene, the ill will which is in the virus. And it reacts to that. I don't want this, and inflames itself to block. And that's your reaction of allergy.
Can recombinant DNA be positive?
I am sure one can insert positive genetic strands equally in this way, but the vehicle of insertion will bring its own particular twist or content. And I'm not sure if we have the ability to prevent that insertion. There are other means now of intervening in genes without using virus as a delivery mechanism, and there's something called Cas-CRISPR which is able to do certain things. But again, to the extent that we are reliant on viruses, there is no way to prevent this particular quality of ill will which is inherent in the virus bundle itself. You cannot prevent its insertion into the cells.
Was the coronavirus?
So now we come to the military application.
Exactly.
The military application of the viruses. And well, I wanted you to understand why we have this problem with viruses and the genetic modifications. You could equally have changed the genetics by other means, which include a psychological intervention, which was the way of the good old days, where you grew many plants, you picked the ones which had the quality, and then you put an intention when planting the seed, and that quality was amplified when the plant grew. So you could take a plant, for example, which is not common to, let's say, Pondicherry climate. You take a cold climate plant, you plant the seed with the intention that it should adapt to this temperature. It grows with slight change. You take its seed and again plant with that intention. and within 2 or 3 generations you will have a plant adapted. And you have done that already? How many generations did it take?
A couple.
Okay, a couple.
But Mother did tell Parichand, when roses could not be grown in Pondicherry, that he had to keep working at it, keep doing it, keep planting new ones, until it was in their consciousness to survive here.
Yes. And so what you're doing is you're infusing the human goodwill and good intention into the plant consciousness, and from seed level, you're helping it to grow with that. So it's equivalent to the gene splicing which you would have done, because you're doing it, finally it's an energy bundle that's meeting energy bundle, but without the virus ill will, which is inherent to current genetic interventions, and it's always ill will. Virus, as I said, there's no good virus. Its only job is get in and replicate itself. It's a kind of a desire ill will impulse. Even if you reduce ill will, it's just persistent desire to get into someone else and push itself in. That's the energy quality to whatever variant of virus you have. And that's used as an insertion. You see how if you think of it occultly, what did the scientist do? He took a genetic quality, let's say a vibration of energy, took this power of insertion of self-aggrandizement, linked it here, and then said, like an arrow, sent it shooting to do its work. Energetically, you see the whole thing, and it's a very different picture. And you understand the results of it. Now, when this was weaponized, it has been weaponized, many viruses have been created. Of course, inevitably, sometimes they leak out. And then you have uncontained kinds of sicknesses that spread overnight. And interestingly, many of these have been correlated with military experiments. Ebola virus, for example, in Africa was spread in a place where there is a special viral lab. It started from there. Of course, they cover it up saying it came from some monkey or some bat or whatever story they make up. But it was always associated with some location. And the current coronavirus, which started in the city of Wuhan in China, that city, or right next to that city, has China's most advanced antiviral, most advanced military viral lab. And the particular sample of coronavirus it had got from Canada, and this was a level 4 lab where they can experiment with this grade of viruses, and they were upgrading to level 5 where they can experiment with even more dangerous viruses such as Ebola and others, for which there is no ability to contain or cure. And just around there, this virus has escaped. So you can say it came from, they can say it came from some animals, but the evidence points to some escape from the military facility. And the evidence is very simple. In the coronavirus, they found there are 4 segments which do not belong to coronavirus, but belong to the SARS virus. Sorry, not the AIDS virus, HIV virus, not the SARS.
HIV.
So HIV virus is so different from the coronavirus, and yet a snippet of gene transferring, you could still say, okay, random mutation. Of course, that doesn't explain anything. But if you find 4 separate chunks, you can't say it's random. It was intentional. And interestingly, we discovered the scientists from that Wuhan lab had published a paper about 10 years ago where they described experiments precisely like this, that they were taking AIDS virus components and inserting into the coronavirus. They were doing that 10 years ago. And suddenly now we have just around that space this particular coronavirus with the AIDS content in it, spreading widely, viciously, rapidly. Numbers which the government are putting out are, according to many serious estimates and the evidence of numbers of people actually being cremated, the numbers officially released are 1/10 of the actual numbers. So there's a huge suppression involved. But why am I pointing this out here? Why is this important? Because from an occult point of view, what were the scientists doing? They took one pattern of bundle of ill will, they took another pattern of bundle of ill will and transferred characteristics of this ill will into that to produce a more sophisticated and complex ill will. What were they doing in their intention was to produce ill will, right? Why is a military scientist experimenting with dangerous viruses to produce more dangerous versions out of ill will? Even if the personal scientist is not doing with ill will, the people who have authorized him are doing it with ill will. And so what you see, I'm trying to show the occult view. Ill will combining using materialized bundles of ill will to produce more materialized bundles of ill will. What happens is, when it escapes, it spreads. And at that point there is no antidote, or at least no known currently. And you see what's happening in the powers that be. They say, well, wait another year and we'll produce a vaccine. And here the story gets weird. In Africa, when the Ebola virus was growing, it had been on for 2 or 3 years, it had been reasonably contained in that area. And there was one scientist who was an American virologist who was right there in the midst of it, studying how it spreads. And then they announced that he had caught the Ebola virus. Till then there was no known cure. They were busy building a vaccine. The day he got infected, suddenly the companies announced, oh yeah, we have, by the way, an experimental Ebola cure, but it's still experimental and we're going to try it out on him. And he's given the experimental Ebola cure the very next day, and he's flown to the United States, driven through the middle of Los Angeles city to go to a hospital facility where he is convalescing and gets well. Now, nobody would do that if they had no known cure. It's almost as if the cure was always there. They don't put it out into the wild to test unless they have a cure to back. But they did not want the cure to be public. When their own person got infected, he would have spilled the beans if they let him die. He would have told everybody, look, we have the cure. So they had to protect him. And then comes immediately after the then President of the United States, Obama, comes out with a public statement, we should not give importance to these experimental cures, we should wait for the vaccine to come out. Because if you bring out your so-called experimental cure, let's say you have 1,000 infected people, they will all be cured. But when you bring out a vaccine, you're going to vaccinate millions of people who are afraid of being infected, isn't it? So you feed on the fear to produce a vaccine which you will sell on a larger mass. And this is where you see the whole game is built around this fear, hatred, perversion of energies operating from more complex mental formations to vital formations to physical formations of the illness. And there's a whole ecosystem of this perversion. It is entirely asuric. Now in this you may not distinguish and say this fellow is an asura. It doesn't work like that. The energy of that whole operation is asuric. And it materializes in that particular form of the modified virus which is put out to infect or accidentally released, as it appears to be sometimes, and spreads in this way. So from an occult point of view, from a spiritual point of view, it is equally possible to reverse this spread by infusing from above a contrary vibration and neutralizing this hatred, illness, ill will vibration. And this is generally what happens. So again, this goes into an area which people may not recognize the value of. When there is a strong infection that has spread, what happened in Japan that the mother narrates, she fought against this force when it came to her. It was sucking her energy. She was growing weaker and weaker. But she had the occult power to push back and neutralize and dissolve that formation. She got cured, but immediately the whole plague ended. Within a day or two, everybody was cured. How does that happen? It cannot happen if it's just a physical, biological process. It happened because the occult force behind it was defeated. Now, it is a fact that whenever there have been such dangerous plagues in the world, there have been interventions from spiritual forces equally to neutralize and contain or completely dissolve that formation. Of course, other formations may grow, etc. It's the reason why life has survived on Earth. Because even as here, you may say random or occult forces are working, there are higher spiritual forces working to neutralize, Goodwill is always greater than ill will and always more powerful than ill will, because the force of harmony is more powerful than the force of division and conflict. And so inevitably those things get defeated, but the key to the defeat is top down through the spiritual and occult intervention, which is happening all the time. We may not know it, that's all. But when human beings participate in building the ill will, then it's as if at a material level there's a formation which is too hard. And the spiritual intervention and the occult intervention has to now act against this occult intervention which has been built up by the humans. And so it takes much longer. So occasionally when in nature you have these plagues that come up, or any kind of such sudden spread of illnesses, there's an intervention, it stops. But when humans have built, they've also built a formation. They have a vehicle now which is sustaining this. And an intervention from above has to fight this formation and vehicle. It's like a rigid carapace or covering that it has to cut through to be able to defeat this force. That's the struggle currently with the coronavirus. And it's one of the reasons why it seems to take much longer and its spread is also more vicious, because there's a human support for it.
Are these laboratories all over the world?
It is shocking if you think about it. China has 4 of these laboratories, United States has 5, France has 1, Canada has 1, UK has, Germany has, I don't know how many.
Why?
You would ask yourself why? If the goal was to find cures for viral diseases, then one is enough for the whole world. Because you don't have more than 1 or 2 serious viral illnesses. One lab would be enough. But you have so many in each of these countries precisely because the goal is weaponization. And that's unfortunately the ill will in humanity, or rather the asuric force now organized in human consciousness, which prevents the divine help from being able to neutralize the thing at its source. And that's why there is this problem. That's why there is so much suffering. And we as if are caught in between in this game. And so from a spiritual perspective, within us, all this discussion was to make us conscious that the physical, biological form of bacteria, virus, or even our physical cells is a condensation in matter of life energy forms which have behind them perhaps even some higher mental intentions or wills, and they are condensed to a physical level. If in our consciousness we are able to grow in positivity, goodwill, and positive will for resilience and good health, and if this intention or this quality of energy vibration can condense down to our most physical level, we can not only become reasonably, let's say, immune to these illnesses, but the goodwill we spread can also reduce and eventually neutralize the forms of ill will that these viruses or bacteria represent. And so you see, in its ultimate sense, it's a battle between the divine forces of evolution and the asuric forces. It operates on so many levels, but this is that grade of the vital physical domain of cellular and even viral structures, which is really a focal point for that battle finally. We have a few minutes in case any of you here have questions, we could address them.
Isn't the spiritual force will help to...
Spiritual force will work naturally. You see, it's like children playing, they end up doing some harm, the parents rush to clean up the mess or to prevent them from harming themselves, but only as much as they allow you to intervene. But if they push you away, what can you do? And that's the problem of the spiritual help. Where these diseases were natural, as has happened at various times, various plagues and other things, of course the help came also. But you have to recognize the help is also battling the opposite force. And sometimes it has a physical basis in humanity.
Now with the advent of the supramental force, how much greater is the help?
Well, the help is greater for sure, but the resistance also has grown greater, which was part of the problem that the mother and Sri Aurobindo had to face. That increasingly, as they brought down the supramental force into the earth consciousness, the resistance against it also hardened and pushed back. That's the reason why Sri Aurobindo had to leave his body, because we had this discussion another time.
Yes.
But finally, all rests on our willingness and the choice we make for what is more important and what is it that we refuse to engage with.
But in these military labs, they created these viruses to put those viruses in other countries
Yes.
and destroy other countries.
Yes. So this particular virus, created as it seems to be in a military lab, has very specific targeting. It seems to target much more an Asian type genetics. It seems to target middle-aged to older people. It seems to be very vulnerable to high humidity and high temperatures. So it does not work in tropical climates. It's like fine-tuned for cooler and drier climates.
And children seem to be not affected
Relatively
by it.
immune. Children are relatively immune. It
Yes.
targets as if the older population, and it seems to target men more than women. Something like that I recall seeing. I've made a list of all the characteristics. I don't know if I can dig it out. But this
So
kind of
now it is
targeting,
turning against them. That means
well, it seems to have escaped.
whatever the weapons you make
Yes.
for destroying others, they can destroy you.
Yes. That's like that. Anybody else has any question? Yes.
Yeah, is it possible to check ourselves if we have any ill will hidden or not the hidden ill wills? Hidden ill wills in us.
Yes.
How to find out and
You know, rather than fighting the hidden ill will within you, you grow in goodwill within you. It's like the battle between good bacteria and bad bacteria. Rather than removing the bad ones, you grow the good ones, the bad ones have no place.
Yes.
So you spread within you the
Yes.
purifying cow dung water, sattvic quality, the milk of the cow, the sattvic quality you spread.
Is there any way to make sure that we are doing the good, all the good things, all good?
You know, you cannot make sure. What you do is, in everything you do, you try to bring more and more goodwill and positivity. And things will pop up. Situations will reveal to you a situation where suddenly you find a negative reaction coming. And you say, where did this come from? And you change it. So every time something pops up, you're being helped to expose and change yourself. That's all.
Love is still the greatest healing force.
Yes. So I made this list interestingly. The new coronavirus infects middle-aged men significantly more than women and children. It infects Asians more easily than other ethnic groups, remains in stealth mode, spreading without symptoms for 15 to 24 days, more than any other virus known to us, far longer than any other, causes anaphylactic shock and rapid death in those vaccinated for SARS, very interestingly.
Oh,
Those who have had a vaccine for SARS, when they get the coronavirus, there's a shock in the system and suddenly they're walking and they just collapse. It's a sudden thing. They suffocate and collapse. And mutates too fast to target with simple vaccines and sounds like a highly focused and targeted weapon. And then I found one more thing. The virus thrives in cold and dry climates, does not survive beyond 30 degrees and 80% humidity. And so it seems as if in the natural cycle of the seasons, as the summer season comes, it will tend to die out. But the protection for us, very simply, is expose yourself to the sun. Breathe fresh air. Do not stay in closed, air-conditioned climate. If you expose yourself to the sun, what is sun energetically? Spiritual light. Isn't it?
Yes.
The sun represents the supramental, the divine truth. And the light of that, you open yourself, let it fill you, breathe in air which is purified with sunlight and freshness. And so when you think of the whole game, and I want to end with this idea, the whole game finally boils down to things happening at a vital level, behind which there is a will which is in the mental level, behind which there are forces, positive, negative, both. And the battle of the forces on each of these levels finally settles in its most material form, even at the level of physical illnesses, viruses and bacteria. But equally within us, our mind or our spiritual light that we can open to, and the mind and life energy down to the physical cells of our body, are really a crystallization in matter of our state of consciousness. And so if we consciously invoke the spiritual light, fill ourselves with the positive vibration and energy, and lead it all the way down into the most material part of our body, well, that's the way to become increasingly more immune to these things. And that is the very nature of the yoga, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So the yoga, in its truest sense and in its most physical result, is the means to become immune to these illnesses, and also for humanity to grow out of the root cause of these illnesses. Namaste.
You can see many of these on the website integralstudies.in on YouTube, and also Mother and Sri Aurobindo will have all of these as well.